Taking a walk out to the latest situation using a different camera. So we'll see how it compares. So, tour around the garage. That's the car body. Here is the chassis, which is pretty much painted. The suspension is back on. We've got threaded holes in the seatbelt, upper seatbelt mountings. Oh, my dog's got out. How did that happen? Hello, Jessica. What are you doing here? Right. That's okay then. So, we've got the engine balanced on top of the couple of pieces of wood actually to get the height right up so I can fiddle with it. It is possible to actually wheel it about in that situation, although without a steering rack being connected at all, there is a rather annoying tendency for the wheels to turn in opposite directions and then it doesn't go very far. So anyway, it will do for fiddling around. And one of the things I've got to experiment with, as you see on the back of the engine, we have I believe it might be called a flex plate. There's a starter ring for an automatic gearbox. It's not a flywheel, even though it looks a bit like one. So the car that this engine came out of was an automatic. So anyway, it needs a proper flywheel, and something a kind delivery driver did actually drop off. Didn't bother knocking on the door or anything, but yes, it was dropped off, and I have yet to open it. But I'm going to guess that that is a flywheel in there. I might actually weigh it in sort of agreement, as it were, with my previous weighing exploits to see how much that actually comes to. What else have we got to do? Yes, I've got pulleys, because I need to run a belt, accessory belt, around all that lot, and of course I've reduced the size of the pulleys, this one and this one. In fact, one time I thought I was going to be able to do away with without having them at all, but it seems that actually what I really need to do is just move them inwards and use them as idlers. So I think one of those was a power steering and the other one was in fact already an idler, but it's now a smaller idler. So it goes down inside the chassis, but I'll need to put a belt on it, so I can do that shortly. I've also got one only of my rear lower seatbelt frames kind of semi in place, although I must admit the clearance to the back axle is a heck of a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. But then again, clearance is clearance, so we'll have to see about that. Oh, what have I got? Yes, I've got a mount for a rollover bar, which I put on. So the foot of the rollover bar will be pressed on that, and that will correspond to this position inside the body, I hope. So we'll see how well that works out. That's also reinforced by another triangulation piece in there. And then there's also plates, I can't see them at the moment because they're under the floor, but down here, under there is a rather large flat plate. I shall have to cut out some of the fiberglass, as in fact I've shown here, to let the floor sit down properly, considering there's a 6mm plate kind of in the way at the moment. So I'll cut that out and then fiberglass over the top of it eventually when the roll cage gets fitted. Right, so I'm going to weigh the new flywheel thing. And there we have it. what do we have? We have a total all-lot weight, including the packaging and the tow rope, of 18.5 kilograms, which is actually a bit less than I thought. On pressure plates. Isn't it too bad? Right. I want my neighbour to start mowing at that very moment I start the camera. Nicely on the end of the engine. And sometimes these bolts have got, yes, a pattern that means you can only put it on one way, and that indeed appears to be the case here. Still not found it. No. Is that it? Could be it. Now the other bit of other compatibility work, shall we say, is, and I know the answer to this question by the way, does the Jaguar clutch plate fit onto a Mazda RX8 gearbox? Are the splines up the middle the same? What's the chances? And the answer is most definitely not. So I'll have to get a Mazda clutch plate, which I kind of knew already, to be honest. But I thought I would at least try the Jaguar one on there. Still, I've got a Mazda one in my eBay shopping basket, and I think I shall now press go. Okay then, so just coming over front of the camera. So as I've now got a proper flywheel, and I've also got a starter motor. And I've been told that it's necessary to have the ring gear on the flywheel machined down so that you can use it as a spacer in order to fit the old ring gear off the automatic starter ring thing. I was fully expecting that, or to fiddle around with the structure of the starter motor. But I thought, well, when I was looking at the way the teeth line up, that looks quite good actually. So I wonder what will happen if I just try it as it is, without any modifications to the adapter plate, no modifications to the starter motor or the ring gear. So I just connect it up and short out the solenoid. What happens? Well, 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 it works perfectly. And I'm just wondering why, because I didn't expect it to. It's a mystery. How does this fortuitous piece of working without expecting actually happen? There we have it. A fully working starter motor on a fully working flywheel with a fully working adapter plate. So I'm really quite pleased by that. To have a fully functioning clutch starter thing is a clutch plate from an RX8, and that's the thing, as I mentioned before, which is actually in my eBay shopping basket already. And to be honest, I'm quite happy. 20 kilogram, I think I said it was, flywheel. That was with the original Jaguar clutch plate. It's not excessive. I thought it might be a lot heavier than that. So, we are moving another step forward towards a fully working solution. Brilliant. Okay, not very nice out here today. And once again I've left the radio switched on, so I'm going to switch that off. So what I have now is a clutch plate. So this is the Jaguar original clutch plate, and this one has just arrived. which is for a Mazda RX8, which is identical in diameter, but slightly different in the middle. Now this raised section worries me slightly. I guess it corresponds to this, which is raised as well, but not nearly as much. So we'll have to see if it goes on. Is to check, I'm sure it will work, but check this Mazda pressure plate actually engages on the input shaft of the gearbox, which it does, no problem at all. Jolly good. And now does this raised part disappear inside the Jaguar flywheel? Yes, it does. That's jolly good news, because it certainly doesn't fit into the diaphragm part, because the fingers on this strange cage arrangement here certainly will not allow this raised piece to go on it. It's rubbing. Fine the other way around, and this is fine the same way around. So it's just a question of normal clutch plate installation. Okay, because I didn't actually review this at an earlier stage, I thought I might as well also explain the adapter plate bought from eBay. And the adapter plate, I'm not going to take it off especially to show, unfortunately, but it's a kind of ring of steel manufactured specially with a special shape, which goes all around the front face of the engine block, or perhaps I should say back face of the engine block. And it has countersunk screws, which I'm pointing at here, and a couple other places, that attach in directly into the engine block itself. And it has dowels that stick out the other way, and threaded holes to accept the bolts from the gearbox. So it means that the adapter plate bolts to the engine, and the adapter plate also bolts to the gearbox, making that compatibility for the two sides. And as well as that, there's the starter motor, which we reviewed before. Starter motor bolts on here instead of wherever that happens on the standard arrangement on the Jaguar gearbox, which I haven't actually got. But anyway, here is where it is in this setup, and it just shoots out and engages a cog with the ring gear here, and the battery turns the whole thing round, and that's all fine and good. Now when it comes to the clutch, the original clutch for the Jaguar, this is the Flywheel, and it's one of these so-called dual mass affairs, and therefore it's got a movable part as well as a fixed part. I don't properly understand these things, to be honest. It's got a small amount of play rotationally, and even a tiny bit sideways. This is not a new one. In fact, I bought it basically because it's cheap, so because it's kind of experimental. It may have a little bit of wear in it, but it's supposed to have some movement there, so I'm going to say it's good enough for the time being, even if it's not perfect. Now this is the pressure plate side of the flywheel, and it works a bit like a brake disc in reverse, in as much as rather than the friction material of the brake disc or the brakes trying to stop the wheels going round, instead of that, the pressure plate grips onto the, so this is the equivalent to the brake pad, if you like, grips onto the pressure, which is a bit like the brake disc, but instead of this part being fixed as it would be on a piece of suspension or something, the other end of it is actually connected to the gearbox, and it causes that to spin. So it's kind of quite equivalent to a brake disc in some respects. and that part of it gets sandwiched with this spring plate, which you operate with your foot on the clutch, and that's kind of how it works. You push the clutch, it disengages the pressure and it all starts slipping. You take your foot off the clutch and it all clamps together and it starts gripping. Anyway, that's a standard methodology of clutches. Anyway, this one here has splines on it to accept the Jaguar gearbox, which of course we don't have. So instead of that, I've got this Mazda pressure plate, which is very, very similar, pretty much identical diameters, but of course this one has the correct splines to engage with the Mazda gearbox. So it goes in exactly where the Jaguar one is, and gets clamped up in exactly the same way again as the Jaguar one would do. The only slight foible is this here. As you can see, there's a lot of slack there, and because the splines need to line up exactly, this offers the possibility of getting the thing off to one side and then you can't get it to go together. This is a sort of standard problem again with clutches, but it's really just a question of getting it in the centre, so there's nothing unusual about that. I may have to use a clutch aligning tool to enable the gearbox to go in, or I may not. I'm just going to review the engine adapter plate clutch gearbox business. So this engine, AJ30 engine, was from a Jaguar S-Type, and it was an automatic car. Came to me, it had a starter gear. I believe they may call it a flex plate, but I'm not sure about that. It's basically a very thin affair. Looks a bit like a flywheel, but it isn't. It's much too light. So I've bought this second-hand manual gearbox type flywheel and a clutch plate and pressure plate, which I've bolted up, torqued up, put Loctite on the bolts and all that. It's one of the so-called dual mass ones, which means it's got this strange business that, to be honest, I don't properly understand, but I'll give it a go. It was cheap, so we'll see. To that I fitted an Mazda RX8 clutch plate, so the Jaguar one obviously won't fit the Mazda gearbox, which is over there. That's been fitted into the flywheel and diaphragm, and it's exactly the same size as the original Jaguar one, which is nice. But of course the splines in the middle are different, the Mazda ones. So what I need to do now, because although I've had the engine and gearbox bolted together using this adapter plate, this is the adapter plate. It's got that's a countersunk big head bolt there with an Allen headed thing. There's some more of those. So that's the bit that bolts to the engine and then bolts from the other side into the gearbox, and as well as the starter motor. So I've had it all together physically, but up to now never with a clutch. So this is an assembly stage which I'm going to try out in a second, which I've never done before. Hopefully it will be very straightforward, but this is what I'm here to find out. Right, what is slightly more difficult than putting it together without a clutch, because I've never before had to get the input shaft of the gearbox to go into a clutch. Which of course you can't see. Fill up this gearbox falling over parallel to the back of the engine. Interesting. I've just come behind you here and I can see that the gearbox is at quite a significant angle to the engine, which I hadn't noticed when I stood right next to it. So this is telling me that the engine needs to be raised up a bit. Ooh, now that was a promising sound. I think the clutch just went in. The input shaft, I think, may have just gone into the gearbox. Into the clutch plate, I mean. Right, let's see if I can wind. Hey, well, that one's. Proof of the pudding, we turn the crank pulley around and see if the gearbox goes round. Except of course I won't be able to see. Can't tell whether it's going round or not because I can't see it. I need a prop shaft. Surely there ought to be some binding or something if it's not in properly. That seems perfectly okay to me. I need something to tell me whether that's going round. Put a twig in there, see if it moves. How about that? Right. If the twig moves, it's going round. Mind you, the gearbox needs to be in gear as well, of course. Well, to be honest, it's not going round. The only question is whether my twig is sufficiently engaged. Oh, maybe I'll just tighten up some more and see what happens then. Surely that must be engaged. It wouldn't go in there otherwise. Well, it might be tempting to say that these bits of studding. Ooh, something happened then. Or a temporary fix for, instead of bolts. In actual fact, it's so much easier. It may well end up being a permanent fix. That's fully bolted up. Now surely that must be going round. How can it not be? Right, now it's fully home and surely it must be working. Now I will perhaps try my twig detector again in case the reason it wasn't working before was actually because it actually wasn't engaged. Ah! Yep, it's working. Did you see movement on the twig? Yes, we did. So we have a connected clutch gearbox engine situation. Brilliant.